The Academy Awards are always a huge deal, right? But what happens when you peel back all that glitz and glamour? Well, today, we're going to do just that. We're diving into a pretty sharp critique of the 2026 Oscars and exploring one specific take on everything from the red carpet to the jokes on stage.
Woke is still alive and well in Hollywood. So this one sentence, it's pretty much the foundation of the entire perspective we're unpacking today. The argument is that the 2026 Oscars were maybe less about the movies themselves and, well, a lot more about pushing a specific cultural agenda.
All right, so here's our game plan for breaking down this critique. We're going to start on the red carpet, then move to the hosts in their comedy, dig into the whole debate around representation, and then wrap things up with a moment that this particular analysis saw as a kind of refreshing change of pace.
Now, it's super important to remember that this entire explainer is focused on just one specific viewpoint. This perspective basically sees the Oscars not just as a party for filmmakers, but as a big stage for what it calls pretty predictable political messaging coming out of Hollywood.
So, where does this critique even kick off? It actually begins before the first award is even handed out, right there on the red carpet. Let's get into how this analysis looks at the political statements celebrities were making as they arrived.
First up is actress Terry Chandran. The analysis we're looking at really zooms in on her Artists for Ceasefire pin, which of course was a statement calling for a ceasefire in Gaza. In this quote, it really gets to the heart of the argument. The viewpoint here is that wearing a pin like this, while maybe the intention is good, is ultimately a net zero kind of action. It's described as a type of performative activism that's become a really familiar and, in this view, a pretty low-impact part of these big events.
The analysis then moves on to Javier Bardem, who, according to this take, took things a step further. The argument is that he didn't just wear the pen, he also made a very direct political statement right from the stage.
And here is where the critique draws a really sharp contrast. It puts these political messages right up against the incredible luxury of the event itself, pointing specifically to the crazy price tag of the fashion everyone is wearing.
Yeah, this line really hammers home that contrast they're highlighting. The perceived clash between a suit that costs tens of thousands of dollars and a message about war and suffering.
All right, so from the red carpet, we're moving inside to the main stage. The analysis now zooms in on the hosts' comedy, and this perspective presents their styles as two completely different approaches to humor.
So the two hosts are really framed as polar opposites. Conan O'Brien's style is described as light, fun, punchy, but avoiding direct partisan politics. Jimmy Kimmel's, on the other hand, is seen as being pointedly political, often taking aim at very specific figures.
So, to give you a feel for Conan's humor, this is a joke that gets singled out. It's described as edgy, sure, and topical, but it's referencing a more general sentiment about Hollywood, not targeting a specific political party or person.
And then to contrast that, the analysis presents this joke from Jimmy Kimmel. It's identified as a pretty thinly veiled, direct jab at Donald Trump, with an extra comment on the recent leadership shakeup over at the CBS network.
Okay, so next up, this analysis moves away from the host's jokes and zeroes in on the winner's speeches. It focuses on a theme that the source material actually calls the Representation Olympics.
This really emotional quote comes from the acceptance speech for K-pop Demon Hunters. The whole speech was really about how important on-screen representation is for Korean artists and audiences. But the analysis immediately pushes back on this feeling with a counterpoint. It points to the 2020 Best Picture winner, Parasite, which was a fully Korean-language film, and basically argues that this kind of incredible, groundbreaking representation isn't quite as new as that speech might have implied. And this perspective also puts these speeches into the context of the Oscar rules themselves. The argument being made is that since films have to meet certain diversity metrics just to get nominated, these statements are happening inside a system that, already requires representation.
Okay, so after all that criticism, the commentary does shift gears a little bit. It highlights one specific moment that it saw as a really positive and, frankly, refreshing contrast to the rest of the show.
And that moment was Jessie Buckley's acceptance speech for her role in Hamnet. The source presents it as a pretty major departure from what it viewed as the night's overall political tone.
So why did this speech stand out so much in the analysis? Well, its focus was described as just deeply personal. It was all about motherhood, love, and gratitude, instead of delivering some broader social or political message.
This final quote really sums up the whole feeling of her speech, and from this particular perspective, it's held up as this beautiful and, in its view, pretty rare moment of just pure apolitical gratitude in Hollywood.
So after walking through this whole critique of the 2026 Oscars, it kind of leaves us with a much bigger question about all award shows, doesn't it? Are they just holding up a mirror to our culture, or are they actively trying to shape it? It's definitely something to think about.